for 2 minutes. We will be with you shortly. Welcome everybody to Exemplary Performance's webcast today. Harness the secrets of exemplary performers and deliver greater results. My name's Wayne Turmel, and while folks are straggling in, let me take care of some of the housekeeping. My job today is to be your host and moderator, which basically means I'll be introducing the speakers, running the polls, and fielding your questions. A couple of housekeeping things before we get started. In answer to the question we will inevitably get, yes, you can get copies of these visuals along with the recording of this webcast. You'll receive an email probably within 24 hours with the link to both of those, and it will be available on Exemplary Performance's website. Also, if you've been on a webinar before, you know that there are sometimes technical issues. The best way to deal with those is to close all other applications you've got running. If you could turn off your email, your instant messenger, anything that sucks up bandwidth, that will both allow you to concentrate on our time together and, more importantly, prevent untoward things like screen crashes and those sorts of things. For those of you listening by voice over IP through your speakers on your computer, the sound sometimes cuts in and out. We apologize for that. That's beyond our control. But if it disappears, it will be back momentarily. It's one of the joys of the online world. And the last thing is that we are going to be taking your questions, and we urge you to get them in early. We always get lots of questions on these webcasts. If you click the little plus sign beside the line that says questions on your control panel, you'll see that there's a place for you to type your questions in. Get them in queue early, and there's a better chance that they'll be answered. Don't save them till the end. Get them in as they occur to you. Now, about your speakers today, it is my honor and my privilege to be working with these folks, Paul Elliott and Nancy Q. Smith. Paul is the founder and president of Exemplary Performance. He's spent the bulk of his career helping organizations such as Microsoft and Agilent leverage the value of the star performers in their organization. His work spans virtually every continent and industry. He's also served as an executive fellow for the American Society for Training and Development, and is credited with helping that organization enhance their focus from simply training to true learning and performance. As for his partner, Nancy Q. Smith, in 2008, Exemplary Performance purchased the workshop services and models belonging to Jim and Dana Robinson, who many of you know. Well, Nancy Smith is the Director of Strategic Partnering for Exemplary Performance, and she continues the Robinsons' work in strategic partnering and performance consulting, both designing functions to operate more strategically and equipping teams to do just exactly that. Now, that you know a little bit about our speakers, it's going to be very helpful to them if they know a little bit about you. So for those of you on the webcast, we would urge you to don't sit back. We want you to be active. And we would like to know from you, what best describes your goal, your role in your organization? Are you an HR manager? Are you in learning and OD? Are you an executive in HR, learning, or OD, a line manager, or some other function? About a third of you have voted, so we're going to give you just a moment. You may have figured out we're not going to allow you to be passive. There are going to be several polls during this presentation, so we urge you to participate. That looks much more like it. We are going to close the polls, and we're going to share the results with you. And Paul and Nancy, it looks like, about half the folks are learning and OD practitioners, and the rest are kind of scattered around. Not too many line managers, a few executives, and a few of those elusive others. So with that, I am going to turn the presentation over to Nancy Smith.
Well, that's terrific, and I want to thank everyone for joining us today. Paul and I are very excited to share this content with you today. It's near and dear to our hearts, and we have an interesting mix joining us on our webinar, and the great thing about this content is no matter what your role in an organization, this content is applicable to you if you're concerned about achieving results. And if you weren't, you wouldn't have taken the time out of your busy lives to join us today. I want to share with you two truths that are really the driving factors as to why this is so important and why we're honored to share this work with you. The first factor is that we truly, in organizations, seriously underestimate the difference in the quality and quantity of the output between exemplary or star performers and our solid performers. The other element is that because this difference in value is not recognized, oftentimes we think of that value as being something that's attributable to factors inherent in stars where we don't believe that short of cloning them, we can really gain the benefits. However, the truth is that stars provide us with a unique internal benchmarking opportunity, and we truly can enhance significantly the results that we achieve in our organization by identifying what they do and how they go about it, and then leveraging that value. I want to share with you our objectives for your participation today. We're going to first help you zero in on the roles that will gain the most by the application of this process. We'll provide you with guidance around the criteria to use to identify these stars or exemplars. We'll also help you see how this helps you identify the performance shoulds based upon their breakthrough practices, and finally help you to design your own system to enable solid players to become more like stars. Your takeaways, which will be provided in the follow-up email, are threefold. The first is the Gap Zapper, which is a tool to define root causes for performance, and this was developed by Dana and Jim Robinson. If you're familiar with their work, as Wayne mentioned, we have a special relationship with them and the exclusive right to distribute their workshop services and models. There also will be a checklist for you to use so you can identify star performers that are applicable for this process. And finally, a star performer interview guide so you can start to work closely with those stars to harvest their practices to benefit your organization. And now, I'm very pleased to turn the presentation over to Paul Elliott.
Thank you, Nancy. It's good to be with you all. Again, the underlying premise of our practice and how we spend our time is that for any role or function or team in the enterprise, there's a variance in performance. And by performance, by that horizontal axis, we don't mean activity, we don't mean competency, we mean measurable business results, business performance. And that gap, as Nancy alluded to earlier, is really significant. But through disciplined practice, we can define and capture how those people on the far right routinely, on a sustainable basis, produce these exceptional results. And once we understand that, there are components of that exemplary performance that can be readily transferred to the great bulk of people who are currently meeting expectations but are not performing at that highest level. And that shift in the curve produces significant value for the enterprise. Again, with that horizontal axis being results, that shaded area of the curve implies we're getting more results based on the same inputs, the same staff size, etc. And that's financially and organizationally a good thing to do. And we want you to think about how big that gap may be. And so we have a poll. We're going to use sales as an example. We've done this kind of work in every arena, but sales is an area that's clear in terms of some of these measures.
Well, thanks, Paul. And we warned you that passivity would not serve you well. We'd like to ask you, in your experience, what's the variance between your most solid performers and just the very good, your exceptionally high performers in sales? What do you think the variance is between solid performers and your very highest performers? We're going to give you another moment to participate. Just click the circle beside the number that is appropriate and hit submit. And about 3/4 of you have voted, so you've got about 4 seconds. And we're going to close the polls and share the results. And it looks as though the majority feel that it's about 50%. Some of them feel it's about 20%, and then a few feel it might be 100 or 150. Paul, what is the actual answer?
Well, there have been multiple studies done in the area of sales, and we're going to show you some of that data right now. A few years ago, McKinsey did an extensive study called The War for Talent, and within that they did look at the sales function as well as other functions, and what they saw was that the A players, the folks on the right, grew revenue year over year by 52%. The solid players did see growth, but it was dramatically less. It was about 4% on the average. And then perhaps the most fascinating thing is C players didn't maintain the level of revenue. C players actually managed to shrink revenue by 15%. Well, it's very difficult to address the C players in a rational and valuable way. It takes a lot of resources to get very small improvements. However, there's a huge upside to shifting the B players closer toward the A players. Now, another study, the Sales Executive Council, also studied this phenomena, and their data shows that the top 20% outperform those solid performers, those 60% in the middle of the curve, by 60%. And when you get into very complex sales environments where the high-performing sales teams outperform the average teams by 180%. Again, the more complex the selling environment, the larger the gap, and therefore the bigger opportunity to learn from the stars and leverage those learnings. Now, the next slide is kind of a simple model. Performance unfolds left to right. The organization provides support so that people can do things. And most of our models about improving performance focus on what support we can provide so that people do things better. The problem is they're not always doing the right things. So the third column over from the left is a focus that we feel is absolutely essential to improving performance, and that is it's not simply what people do, it's the results that they produce, and it's the alignment of those results to the goals and strategy of the organization. So when we engage with the client in this arena, we analyze right to left. If we work left to right, we're addressing all those factors that generate cost for the enterprise. When we work right to left, we start out defining the value proposition, identify the stars around that value proposition, and then decide what activities are necessary and what influences should be provided. And that allows us to have a much leaner approach. And that's shown in the next slide. By defining the output on the right, all the activity of the folks and the support we provide should fall within the upper and lower limits of that blue center row. So by defining those outputs, in a sense, it's a lean approach to optimizing performance. We're only going to reinforce the behaviors that contribute to the output that we want that supports the strategy we're trying to execute. And we're only going to provide the knowledge, skills, staff, etc., those resources on the left that support the behaviors that support the output. It's a simple concept, but if we don't use the output as the filter, we can spend a lot of time enhancing the behaviors above and below the line, which equates to helping people get really good at things that don't matter. And so that output orientation really allows us to take a lean approach. Now let me just give you one example. Again, we're just simply using sales because it's easy to work with the numbers. In a recent project, we were supporting a sales organization of roughly 400 people, and the average quota was $1 million a year. The 20 exemplary performers routinely were producing 50% above that quota, and that's a significant difference. Now, you can't get everyone up to that same level of performance. In other words, you can never get to the point where everybody's an exemplary performer. However, if you simply close the gap by 20%, you've raised the average performance by $100,000 a year per person for the 380 solid performers. That's a revenue increase of $38 million, or roughly 10%. And typically in these kinds of projects, that first 20% improvement is pretty straightforward and pretty obvious once we've completed the analysis. Every increment beyond that 20% becomes more and more challenging, but there's often obvious practices, current best approaches that the high performers use that, once understood, can be readily transferred to those solid performers in the middle. Nancy?
Thank you, Paul. What you see on the screen is a picture of the Fosbury flop. Prior to the 1968 Olympics, when athletes wanted to tackle the high jump, they'd go over the bar forward rather than backward. What Dick Fosbury did in 1968 earned him a gold medal, and he had a huge height increase, over 7 feet 4 inches. What was unusual about this, and why we're here today, is to challenge you to seek out the Fosburys in your organization, because after that Olympic event, every high jumper changed how they tackled that high bar, and everyone's results improved. So who truly are the Fosburys in your organization, and how can you assure that you're achieving results? To help us, we're going to be using a model developed by Dana and Jim Robinson called the need hierarchy. Perhaps you're familiar with it. I'd like to provide you with an example. What we want to do in organizations is align 4 different types of needs. The business needs or results are the highest order need. An example of a business need would be manufacturing uptime. Obviously, if you're not a manufacturing company, this may not be a business need that you're pursuing, but clearly manufacturing companies need to maximize the value of the equipment and resources that they have to assure that the equipment is operating well. A performer group that has a significant impact on that is maintenance technicians. And that group, one accomplishment or result that they must produce is to have assured that proactive maintenance is performed. A need that they would have in their work environment in order to assure that that is happening is that they would need access to maintenance records, access to equipment, parts, and supplies. They can't do their job without it. They would not be able to produce the accomplishment of having proactive maintenance performed. A capability need they would have would be knowledge of early signs of equipment failure. Perhaps the equipment makes a funny noise in between even proactive maintenance that they need to be able to pick up on to know when something needs to be taken care of. All of these needs work together. And as people who are concerned about performance and results, we need to focus on all those needs. Now, there's a curiosity, however. We often skip performance. And when we define performance, we often define it in terms of activities or behaviors, rather than assuring that those activities or behaviors are in the context of results. Here's a little deeper dive. Performance should, by role, consist of 2 elements: accomplishments, or those results that contribute to the business need, supported by key behaviors. Let's provide you with a client example of this. A client that we worked with was concerned about the role of software account manager. There was tremendous variation in performance on the team. One aspect that they had a concern about was a proof of concept session. Their performance that they had defined for that was that the proof of concept session must be scheduled. However, when we worked with this small segment of the population, the star performers, what we discovered is their accomplishment was to have agreed upon with the client the criteria for a successful proof of concept session. That made all the difference in the world. So you can see by simply focusing on the behavior that was identified, they did not get the results that they needed. Let's dig a little deeper. If we look at the GAPS logic, again, this is from the Robinsons, it consists of really 4 different levels. Go for the should, analyze the is, pin down the causes, and select the right solutions. Here it is in the context of the need hierarchy. The should has to do with your business targets and your performance targets. A for analyze the is refers to both the current performance in terms of operational numbers as well as the current performance of people. Pin down the causes means we're looking to see what specifically in the work environment enables or proves as barriers to performance, as well as what elements of capability are the barriers enablers to performance. Only when we know these things can we select the right solutions, and working with stars helps provide us with unique and important insight into this process. And now I'd like to turn it over to Wayne. Wayne, perhaps we've got some questions to answer.
Well, we do, and we urge you, as questions occur to you, please write them in the question box and get them to us. That way we'll be sure they're in queue. We've had a number of questions about the PowerPoint presentation. Again, you will have access to that, to the recording, and the tools that Nancy has spoken about in an email that will follow this within about 24 hours. So you will have access to this information. We've got a couple of questions in queue here. Paul, we'll start with you. Somebody's asking about customer service reps or tellers at their bank, and I guess they're wondering how can they improve the number of transactions that they handle in a day by using this process?
Okay, great question. Obviously, what we would start with first is identifying the high performers, and most point-of-sale systems within banks would provide data around the number of transactions handled by tellers or customer service reps over a particular period of time. And then we would do case-based studies or interviews, and in this case where the cycle time is short, we'd actually like to observe people and see how those people with minimal transaction time are doing that on a recurring basis. However, I would like to push back just a little bit, and if you remember the slide about analyzing from right to left, my question would be, is transaction time, average transaction time, an outcome that aligns with the strategy? Today, in the kind of competitive environments in which we operate, things like customer retention, perhaps upselling or cross-selling, may be critical strategic goals of the enterprise. And that particular metric may be counterproductive to those strategic goals. Now, it may not be. I'm not in a position to answer that. But I would at least ask you to be sure you're analyzing right to left, and that any outcome that you choose to enhance is closely tied to the strategy you want to implement.
Okay, thank you. And Nancy, this question is right up your alley. How does this approach vary from traditional job analysis or task analysis?
That's a great question, Wayne. Thank you. And early in my career, I spent a lot of time in this arena, so I speak from experience here. The difference is marked because the focus is on the accomplishments or the outputs of value, and your selection of those stars assures that those truly are the people who are achieving the optimal business results possible. And so the focus, rather than being solely on behaviors or activities supported by, skills and competencies, is truly on those behaviors and practices that produce the outputs of value that enable the organization to achieve the results it needs. So it's a very focused, very performance and results designed process.
All right. Well, please get your questions in queue. We'll be taking more of them throughout the presentation. And Paul, on to you.
Thanks, Wayne. And I would like us to comment a little bit further on what Nancy just said. I think the most significant shift someone can make when they really want to focus on improving performance is the shift in their mental model from focusing on the behaviors of the people to the results of the people. I don't think that can be understated. When I first started to do performance improvement work a long, long time ago, I didn't get it at first, and I thought simply helping people do things better was a valuable result of this kind of work. But again, we can help people become excellent at things that don't matter. And that focus on results is really a critical transition and not an easy one. Everything in our HROD learning culture for the past 50 years has shifted from knowledge to behavior, and we haven't effectively shifted from behavior to results. So just some additional thoughts about that. Well, if we do want to move down this path and drive greater results in the business, where do we put our resources? Is there a way to prioritize what we're doing so that, given our current economic times, we're getting the biggest bang for the buck? Well, in this kind of representation of an organizational or functional chart, we can't tackle all the boxes simultaneously. So again, by analyzing right to left, we want to identify the roles and the outputs of the roles that most closely align with the strategy of the enterprise, with the organization. But there's a second variable. If there is a role where everyone is performing exceptionally well and it is strategically critical, there's really no upside to tackling that role. So the second characteristic we want to look for is wide variance in current performance. So again, two characteristics to identify where we want to focus our resources: the close link to strategy and wide variance in current performance. That really gives us the biggest upside, sometimes called the potential to improve performance. So Wayne, I think you have a question for us.
I do, and this will help focus, I think, everybody's thinking and get them perhaps approaching things in a new way. We're going to ask you, think about your job. What is the most strategic role for your organization? What's the most strategic role? Is it an R&D specialist, a customer service rep, an account manager or salesperson, a supervisor, or something else? If we can have folks vote, please. Just think about your organization in particular. What's the most strategic role? And it's funny, some folks are changing their minds as they go here. We'll give you just another moment. We've had less than half the folks vote, and we want to give everybody a chance to participate. And we will close the poll at this point and take a look at the results. And it looks like it's pretty evenly divided, although a lot of people, not surprisingly, believe that sales and customer service might be the most strategic role for their particular organization. Paul, what do you have to say about that?
Well, obviously, given what we've been saying, all those answers are correct because it's unique to your setting. Again, the way we would Prioritize is work backwards from strategy to the required outcomes, and then secondarily, determine which strategic outcomes have the greatest variance, and then which roles are essential to producing those outcomes, and that gives us the upside. So here in this tool to identify the A positions, that is the positions with the greatest leverage, the questions are, what are the key targets or outcomes or strategy we're trying to achieve? How do the results compare? And then we want to learn how the better performing areas are able to achieve those results. And when we ask those questions, the bottom question has helped us identify where we're going to focus. Once we've identified that employee group, and by the way, it can be an individual role or it can be a functional team. You can do this analysis role by role, or you can do it looking at teams' performance. We would then ask the performance should questions. How does the performance vary within that group? And how are those exceptionally high performers consistently exceeding expectations? So let's take one more poll question, and here we're going to look at a specific context. So it may not represent your company at all, but Wayne, do you want to go ahead there?
Sure. Think about a cellular telephone company. It's an example we're all familiar with, and their goal is to retain 97% of their customers. Which role do you think is most pivotal to that? Remember, it's retention of customers. Is it the customer service rep, the network maintenance engineer, the repair technician, the salesperson in the store, or we don't really know? It kind of depends. Remember, their goal is retention of customers. Which is the most pivotal role for that organization? And again, we'll have everybody take a shot at it. We've got about half the people voted, so we urge you to get in there and get your answer heard. And we're going to give you about 20 more seconds. Which role is most pivotal in customer retention? And we're going to close and share the results. And Paul and Nancy, it looks like a little over half think that the customer service rep is probably the most pivotal role there. A few think it might be the network engineer. About a third of people, though, say it depends. What is the right answer there?
Well, again, there isn't a right answer. It depends, and it depends on the variability being exhibited across those roles. So if you're a customer of a cellular company where network reliability is unpredictable, trust me, they're not going to retain 97% of their customers. And the network maintenance engineer may be the dominant role that can impact customer retention. However, if you're on a network where when you call in for customer service, there's a 45-minute wait with horrible music, it could be the customer service rep is the most important. So what we want to emphasize here is prioritizing your resources to drive enhanced performance depends on your situation, your strategy, the outcomes that are required to support that strategy, and the variance within the production of those outcomes. Now, this picture up on the screen right this second, I wish it was that easy that by looking around, we could identify those exceptionally high performers. They're flying through their air, the cape is fluttering in the background. But that's not the way we really do it. What we do is when we're clear about the outcomes, we see what metrics are available, and we take a look at those quantifiable business results and map out the metrics. We may map that also, we may match that also with qualitative input. You may have an internal high potential employee program. You may have some award programs, and so we can take multiple data points to pick the high performers. But we want to use quantifiable data to the extent that it's available and meaningful. And it's not that they just achieve results on occasion. We want to look for folks who are doing that consistently. It's really critical that it's not a fluke, that the people we spend time with to capture these models of optimal business performance have a sustained record of producing that high level of performance. One thing we can't count on are performance appraisals alone. They typically aren't as objective as we would like. They may be one data point, but they shouldn't be the sole data point. The other thing is they have to have some history in the role. You would think that all high performers do, but occasionally somebody comes into a role and has a good start, but they may not sustain that over time. So we like them to have some history in the role. And as we get into the analysis, we'll talk more about this later, but it's absolutely essential that you do case-based work, either interview or observation around real cases. Exceptionally high performers tend to be unconsciously competent. It's hard for them to tell you why, or they tell you the wrong reasons why they're good. Well, I've been in the role for 20 years. I went to MIT. Whatever the reason, it isn't really what separates them. It's only as you reverse engineer real cases that you start to uncover the meaningful data. Nancy?
Thank you, Paul. So if we return to this gaps logic and take a look at the gaps map on the screen, when we work with star performers, we're identifying them based on their achievement of the business shoulds. And what we can harvest when we work with them are really a couple of very key areas in this map. This performance should, for some reason, stars are much better than everybody else in defining the target accomplishments and the practices that support that. Also, they can help us identify enablers. They may have created a tool. They may have found a hidden resource. They may have a particular decision criteria that they use. And all of those elements or factors become enablers. Now, of course, you still want to work with your solid or typical performers to define the current performance, because that's what's leading you to the results that you're experiencing today. But stars have a unique vantage on performance should, as well as those enablers to success. When we work with stars, we gain unique understanding for those performance and role expectations in terms of their outputs or deliverables, as well as the behaviors or practices they go about it, articulated in a unique and important way. They also provide us with context as to their rich mental models, sort of the prism or the pane of glass, as Peter Senge would say, that influences or distorts how they approach things and therefore the actions that they take as a result. They also can provide us with insight into predictive metrics, how they make judgments about what and when to do, how they know whether they're on track, very essential things that the organization is not tracking but can be instrumental in driving success for other performers. They also have a unique and special understanding of how to master and execute the fundamentals. If you're familiar with the book Outliers, you understand the importance of practice, and these people are absolute experts. The other element is that their practices, decision processes, the criteria they use, standards, special workarounds or tools, we often find this when we start interviewing stars, are essential and can be completely transferable to others. One of the things we want to point out is just this point at the bottom of the slide. The performance should is often a composite. In other words, the star or exceptionally high performers that you'll be working with and interviewing, they each have their own definition and way of going about things, and there is some overlap, but almost universally, the stars are as excited as everybody else about the profile that results because they learn what they can do better too. In other words, they're doing some or maybe even most of it, but not all. So everyone's performance can improve. And that idea of a future perspective is really important to challenge, to link back to the future goals of the organization to assure that you're not producing a model of best current performance. What you're doing is producing a model that's going to serve the organization for some of the longer term objectives. What you will receive as a part of your participation, which will come in the follow-up email, is a more extended version of this Gap Zapper. And what this does is it shows the root causes for performance. The list you'll receive is voiced in terms of enablers. This can help target your questioning for stars to see most specifically how they are going about achieving the unique results that they're achieving, as well as perhaps any unique experiences that they have that you will need to replicate in others. The star performer interview process is actually, as Paul's mentioned, it's important to have it be case-based. Typically, you want to have it in the workplace. Over dinner probably is not the ideal context for this kind of interview. You also want to have it focused on those accomplishments or outputs that drive the business results with the actions in context. So you want to look at whatever accomplishment is being focused on and really zero in on that, and your interview guide will help you with that. The questioning process is precise and deep. You really want to get into their head to get insight about how they're making decisions, what criteria they're using, how they're determining what to do first, second, and so on, and what triggers them into action. You'll also note that there's a note at the bottom that managers of stars make a great resource when you have clusters of high performers. That manager is a great source of data and could be regarded also as a star. And then you'll also see on the screen other data sources. We'd like to share with you some real-world examples just to provide a little bit additional context for you so you can begin to take this approach in your organization. We did a project in the refinery, and in this case, they were having some problems with some valves that were very costly to replace and causing inordinate delays in the operation of the refinery. As you can see on the screen, the official documentation identified that you're supposed to slowly open valve A to allow material to flow through valve B. However, there was a risk. If you did it too quickly, you damage valve B. If you did it too slowly, what was supposed to take 20 minutes would end up at 2 hours. Now, what the star performer did was he used a temperature sensing gun. When he did that, he identified when it was precisely 400 degrees, and that was the time to let the valve B operation take over. Now, there were several aspects about this star that you could not replicate, but what you could replicate was this practice using this tool of the temperature sensing gun and reduce cost and delay for the refinery. Paul, I know you've got another example for us.
Yes, it's from the area of software sales, and we were helping an organization look at some of its competitive wins. So we were looking across a sales team and decoding how some teams who had consistently won against one or more competitors had managed those deals. So as we were doing that on a particular deal, we found that everyone on the team and the customer attributed the win to the proof of concept that had been developed by one of the technical members of the sales team. They felt that that was kind of the tipping point in making their decision, or making the decision, to go with our client. Now, as we described, we met with this technical sales specialist. He pulled out his files about this particular case, and we went step by step through the process of what we thought was producing the outcome of a successful proof of concept. In the process, he said, well, wait, my real output was not the POC. My real output was an internal customer advocate for our solution. And what he had done differently was, rather than simply produce the proof of concept and then demonstrate the result for the customer team, he had identified a person of high influence inside the customer account. He became aware of the current application's strengths and weaknesses. He scripted the proof of concept, but did not actually produce it. And then he found time on the calendar of the person he had identified, sat down with him, they coded the proof of concept together, and that person saw the current problems resolved by our client's solution. And that individual became the tipping point by advocating our client's solution across the decision-making folks inside of his organization. And then once we understood that, I have to say technical sales specialists don't always have those kinds of skills or behaviors, but once we understood it, we actually produced a 2-page job aid or performance support tool for people producing POCs so that they could tie in more closely with their client looking for internal customer advocacy. Now on the next slide, I think it's important just to kind of really bring to closure how this process varies from some others. So what makes a high performer? Well, there's various and sundry tools or models you can have for picking people and better equipping people. So some organizations use personality types or personality styles as a selection tool so they get the right people in the slot. So you have the Myers-Briggs, you have the Hogan, you have many of these things. And these tools capture the preferences of folks who are going to be in the role. So for example, when you use that kind of personality type, attention to detail, adherence to patterns, and a reluctance to incur risks or experiment are some of the preferences that you could identify. Turns out that both those preference sets are applicable to 2 different roles. That is the pilot, an airline pilot, and an accountant. And obviously, having filed taxes, hopefully by yesterday or 2 days ago, attention to detail matters, adherence to a pattern matters, and unless we want to go to jail, we don't want to see much experimentation. And those of us who fly feel the same way about pilots. But there's another approach or model, and we refer to that as competencies. And competencies are measures of capacity or capability or potential. There's lots of models out there. And again, if we look at those 2 roles, their competencies align also. You have to be able to make quick choices. You have to use effective approaches. You could go on and on with whatever competency model you're using, but you'd find that there was a lot of parallelism between pilots and accountants. But when you take an outcomes focus, clearly the outcomes between the pilot and the accountant are totally different. So that's where the power of this accomplishment-based or outcomes-based approach really starts to come into play. From a business perspective, it's the outcomes that matter. And that orientation is a mental shift, but it does help us produce exceptional value when we're doing this kind of work.
Thank
Nancy?
you, Paul. And what we really encourage you to do is to take the information that we've shared along with the tools that you're going to be receiving tomorrow and leverage that value. First, focus on the gaps in business results that are most critical in your organization. You can use the questions that we have shared to influence your clients, your business leaders that you're working with, to zero in on the gaps that are most important. Then you need to identify the pivotal or most instrumental roles. We've been talking about pivotal roles in the singular, but oftentimes there are multiple roles that will be considered. Using the gap logic and questioning techniques to identify those areas where there's variation and yet some are achieving targeted or close to the targeted results. You want to be careful how you define your criteria to select those stars. understanding that you're typically looking at a population that's less than 5% of the total. You'll be interviewing those stars, following the interview guide, supporting by the Gap Zapper, and asking very detailed questions. It's very fun to do this kind of interviewing because oftentimes the star performers had no clue, and they'll say, wow, that's a good question. This is what I do, or this is how I go about it. But as Paul said, the key is focusing on the accomplishment or the output, identifying that as a tangible result, and then working backwards from there. And then you can harvest what they're accomplishing, their practices and methods, to share with others in the role. One of our very large clients actually refers to this process as something that's done by the field, for the field, because the benefits are so great. If you want to learn more, please contact us. We can share information with you as to how we teach organizations to do this work more deeply, or how we work these projects as an extended part of your team to help clients leverage value when the stakes are truly high. You're also welcome and invited to visit us at ASTD. Actually, Paul, you and Al Folsom will be presenting twice on Sunday and Tuesday, Star Performers, What Makes Them Tick. And then I'll be presenting Sunday a case-based study on the work that we've done with Alcoa on their HR strategic execution, delivering business results about their global HR transformation. We also encourage you to read the book Performance Consulting and to visit our website, exemplaryperformance.com, for case studies and white papers. And Wayne, I believe you may have some questions for us.
We do have some questions in queue. We've got a few minutes left. We want to get right to them, and we urge you to get your questions in. Let's start with a pretty basic one. Is the difference between behavior and results as simple as the difference between what and how? Like everything else, you make it sound so easy.
I think that's a good summary. The problem is we've been inculcated with confusing sometimes the what and the how. But one way of thinking about it is the accomplishments or results are the nouns, what's left behind after the action is completed, and the other are the actions themselves. Maybe just a very brief hypothetical case. I happen to be out in Seattle today. Today it's sunny, but this spring that's been rare. And so I've been out here for about 8 days, and it's rained 6.5 of the 8 days. If I was driving down I-5 during one of those rainy days and had a blowout and called AAA, they sent out a tow truck to fix my tire because I just didn't want to get soaked through to the skin. The person gets out of the truck, jacks up the car, removes the tire, and then taps on my window and says, look, it's my dinner break. I want to run out and get dinner, and then I'll come back and finish the job, but will you pay me for the work that's done already? Well, the point is there's been activity, but no output. There's no value to me as the customer to having the wheel off. The value is only produced when there's a result that matters. In this case, a vehicle that I can operate. And so we really need to be careful about making that shift and being clear about these major outputs or results and their alignment with strategy.
Terrific, thank you. And here's a question a lot of people ask, and this is probably right up Nancy's alley. If their abilities are unconsciously competent to them, and we're coming in as performance consultants, we don't know their job, how do we figure out what they're doing, especially if they're internal mental decision-making processes?
It's really based on the questioning technique. So you start with the major accomplishment or business result, and then you focus in on what specifically they consider their deliverable, and you'll get many to drive that, and then you just start asking questions down. Now, in order to produce that, what specifically are you doing? Tell me more. What do you do first? How do you consider that? And when they start to say, well, then I decide, what criteria are you using? And it's really peeling back, I know this is an overworn expression, but you're really peeling back the layers of the onion, because oftentimes they will not have thought about that, Or you may end up in a situation where they say, well, as a matter of fact, I built a spreadsheet, and this is how I prioritize. These are the criteria that I use, and would you like a copy? So oftentimes, they're not necessarily thinking that what they're doing is different, but it's the way that we ask the questions and taking the time to work with them and talking through the specifics with a given case that make it really come to life.
Terrific, thank you. We've got time for one or two more questions, but this is a pretty good one. How do you deal with customers who have quality standards or standard operating procedures that might be getting in the way of results? And this is particularly true in regulated industries. And sometimes, these are good SOPs, and sometimes they're mandated. What do you do in situations like that?
Well, there's a couple of responses, but let me start off by saying, in this process, we often identify both the facilitators and barriers to success. And obviously a mandated process, a regulated environment can provide SOPs that help people succeed, but they can also have SOPs that are inhibitors. So when we uncover something like that, if there is a way to recommend changes, we certainly make that information available to the client. If those changes can't be made, then we look for other variances that are under the control of the performers, and we never encourage people to violate rules or regulations, although we may challenge those rules or regulations. But there are often opportunities to enhance performance while staying in compliance.
Terrific. Well, thank you so much. And we are coming up on the top of the hour. We do want to respect everybody's time. Nancy, anything you want to say in closing?
Sure. I just want to thank everyone for joining us. As you can hear, Paul and I are very passionate about this because every day we see and deliver the benefits to our client organizations. And we are truly proud to continue the legacy as a life's work of Dana and Jim Robinson. So if you want to find out more information, please do visit us at exemplaryperformance.com or call or email us. And we do hope to see you if you're planning on being at ASTD. And please continue to watch out for our webinar series. Our next one is scheduled for July. Thank you, Paul and Wayne. It's been my privilege to work with you today. And thank you, everyone, for attending.
Well, thank you, everybody. That is our webcast. We will have another one in July. We urge you to tell your friends. In the meantime, know that you will be receiving an email in the next 24 hours that will include this PowerPoint presentation, the tools that Nancy spoke about, and the link to the recording that you can revisit and share with your colleagues. Thank you so much for visiting us at our Exemplary Performance webcast. We look forward to seeing you on a future presentation.